Gute Woche. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Gimel Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz is the day when the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from prison and he was sent off to Chazarah. Rebbe says that when originally, the first year when it happened, Gimel Tammuz, nobody really knew what this is going to lead to. Nobody knew, is it a step in the real direction of good, to real good, or what will be the consequences of it? See, the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested 15 days in the month of Sivan. And after being in prison, Frierdiker Rebbe himself writes in his memoirs the severeness of the prison he was in. Frierdiker Rebbe describes all that. So after being arrested for a period of 17 days, they transferred him, they took him out of prison, and he was sent far away into deep Russia, into a small town called Kostroma. In fact, Rebbe referred to it today also in the Farbrengen. It was at the train station when the Frierdiker Rebbe parted from Chassidim and was on his way, about to leave the Kostroma. That is when he spoke the famous Sicha that it is only the Yiddish guf Yiddish body that has gone into Golas, and the neshama of a Yid has never gone into Golas, and therefore the neshama of a Yid, there is nobody that has any say or any control of the neshama of a Yid. Imagine, these are the words which the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke at such moments when he was sure that KGB agents are around, no question about it. It was a time when they transferred him from prison to sending him away into Kostroma. And they gave him an opportunity to part with his family and with his friends, with Chassidim. So this was on Gimel Tammuz, 3 days in the month of Tammuz. The Rebbe says when it originally happened, nobody knew, is this a step in the right direction, or chas v'shalom not. But as everything developed throughout the later years, it came out to be that this was the Aschalta de Geula. This was the beginning of his release. In other words, by the mere fact that he was taken out of prison and was sent off to Kostroma, this in itself already made his detention much easier than it was the first 17 days. Bichlal, the Rebbe continued, anything that happens to a Nasi Yisrael is something which has a shaykhs to every Yid. So Mamela, this inning of Gimel Tammuz as well has a shaykhs to every Yid. Especially that when we look into the details of the reasons why he was arrested, the Frierdiker Rebbe was not arrested for any private matter. It was for his involvement, l'toivas haklal, where he did his selfless dedication work for the upkeep of Torah mitzvahs in that time Russia. And furthermore, there's the famous letter which the Frierdiker Rebbe writes after he was released from prison. The first year when Yud Beis Tammuz was celebrated, there's a very famous letter written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, which the Rebbe refers to it at many occasions. And today, the Rebbe also explained it at length. Frierdiker Rebbe there writes, Loi oisi bilvad go ala Kodesh Baruch Hu. It is not something which is to him personal, that only he himself was released. Ella, but koil asher b'shem Yisrael yechuneh. This is something which really affects every Yid, to the extent that even those that are only called Yid, Yechuna, now Yechuna in Hebrew does not mean identified. Yechuna in Hebrew would mean a nickname. In other words, a secondary name. What's pshat? Means that even those people that to them Yiddishkeit, Yisrael, is something secondary to them, even to such Yidden, the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, affects such Yidden as well. The Rebbe explained today, what is the inyan of a kinui? We say a kinui is a nickname, or a name which is not a primary name. The Rebbe brings out, by the Rebishter we also have this. We have the main name of the Rebishter, which is Shem Havaya, and then we have Shem Elikim. The world was created with Shem Elikim. Bereshis bara Elikim es hashamayim v'sofos. To reveal Shem Havaya, This first happened after the world existed for the full week, and later the pasuk tells us, "B'yoyim broi," the day was created, "Havaya l'kim eretz v'shamayim." But throughout the 6 days of creation, we do not find the mention of Shem Havaya. Rabbi says, the word kinui, which means not an original name, but a nickname or something like it, is bigematria elikim. If we were to take the numeric value of kinui, it totals 86, just like elikim. Was weiß das? That the Shem elikim is a kinui to Shem Havaya. In other words, it is not the real identification of the Rebishter through Shem elikim. The true identification and revelation of Get L'Kayit is through Shem Havaya. However, Shem elikim is a kinui to the Rebishter. What does all this mean in Avodah? So Rebbe explains. The Rebishter Dafki created the world with Shem elikim and not with Shem Havaya, because being that there is the revelation of godliness is not in its fullest force as if it would be through Shem elikim, Memele, this leaves room for Avodas HaTshuvah. If the world would have been created with Shem Havaya and the revelation of godliness would be in its fullest force, then we would never have to come on to Tshuva. Why? Because nobody would ever do anything wrong. If nobody does anything wrong, then we don't come on to Tshuva. But this is not what the Rebishter wanted. The Rebishter wanted, and what is dear to the Rebishter? Dafke when a Yid does do Tshuva. And in Tshuva, naturally, there are various levels. Many, many levels in Tshuva. Until we find the level in Tshuva which the Gemara brings out, the Tshuva of Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. Gemara explains about a person who committed all sins only possible, and then he did Tshuva. The Gemara concludes, Bocha Rebbe, that Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, cried, and he said, Yesh kainai lamai b'sha'achas. There's a possibility for a person to acquire his world, the world to come. In other words, all his achievements were b'sha'achas in 1 hour. In other words, by the mere fact of him doing tshuva, the Gemara concludes that he did tshuva to such an extent that he didn't hold out any longer. His neshama passed out. So, we see from this that this is an unusual madrega of tshuva. Why? Because otherwise it wouldn't have led to the fact that the Rebbe should cry about it when he's discussing it. What's the pshat Rebbe cried? Bechia, crying, it's explained in Chassidus, originates from moisrei moichin, when there's an overflow in his intellect. In other words, something which his mind cannot absorb. He cannot swallow it, he cannot understand it, he cannot grasp it. This leads that the person should burst into tears. Rebbe was so kind of like excited of this level of tshuva that it led, which he heard about from Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya, that this led to it at Bocha Rebbe. So on one side we see that this is something which is unusual, this level of tshuva. Because even in later generations we don't find that the Gemara and Chazal or in Svarim, it should be mentioned of anybody else, the equal to Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. So we see that this was like a one-time thing by Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. But again, in tshuva there are levels. And what does the Rebishter want? The Rebishter wants that the Avodas HaTshuvah should be dafke through Gashmis the Kinyan. And when a step further, he says today we are on the day of Shabbos. Shabbos also has a very obvious shaychus to tshuva. As the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaTshuvah, that Shabbos and Toshev are the same letters. Take the same letters, put together the word Shabbos, and the same letters put together the word Toshev. So the shaychus between tshuva and Shabbos is very obvious. How does a Yid do tshuva on Shabbos? Shabbos we have to serve the Rebishter through Einig. And Shulchan Aruch tells us pleasantness. Enjoy the Shabbos. How do we enjoy the Shabbos? So Shulchan Aruch says, Basar Shamein v'yayin yosha. Through Gashmiyas, through eating a good piece of meat and enjoying it through a drink of wine. And this is how we enjoy the Shabbos. So Basar Shaman v'yayin yashan, the Rebbe says, these are such Gashmiyas the Kinyanim, that even a non-Jew also has a taiva to such type of things. Why? These are things which simply attract any human being. And at the same time we are told that how does a Yid accomplish his Avodah of Shabbos? It is dafke through these Gashmiyas the Kinyan. Well, they brought the famous vote from the Baal Shem Tov. Shem Tov says, teaches on the pasuk, Kisire chamoyer seinacha. If you will look at chamoyer meaning chumriyas and gashmiyas. If you will look at gashmiyas, one may think that gashmiyas is the enemy, the rival to serve the Rebishter. So a Yid should know it is not so. And as the pasuk concludes, Azoiv ta'azoiv imo, you should go along and help him. The same thing when we're talking in Gashmi, in Ruchnius and Avodas Hashem. How does a Yid serve the Rebishter? What's the most advisable way to serve the Rebishter? Not to neglect the guf. Chas v'shalom. The Rebbe brought, there's an expression in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, how a Yid is supposed to treasure his guf, because the guf, the body, doesn't even belong to us. A Yid is not a balabas on his own body to do any harm to it. Why? Because Alter Rebbe tells us in Shulchan Aruch, Haguf kinyone shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who does the guf belong to? The guf is the possession of the Rebishter. So therefore, chas v'shalom to say that we will do things that will be harmful to the guf. But how does a Yid have to serve the Rebishter? Serve the Rebishter, azoiv ta'azoiv imoy. Help along with him, work along with him. In other words, dafke through Gashmiyas. Through Gashmiyas, the Kenyanim, this is the right and ideal way which the Rebishter wanted that he should be served. The whole kavanah, the whole intention of Bria Soilam is that the Rebishter wants that, on the contrary, dafke through Gashmiyas to serve. Which this is the Inyan, the Rebbe spoke regarding Gimel Tammuz, which comes out today on this Shabbos. Talking about it, he mentioned specialty of number Gimel. We're now coming from the month of Matan Torah. Matan Torah has also stressed the Inyan of 3. Matan Torah was in the 3rd month, and Uyont Lisoi, the Gemara tells us that Torah was given in the 3rd month. Torah consists of 3 parts. Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. It was given to a nation which consists of Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. And now we're coming from the month of Sivan and we're entering Tammuz, and here we are celebrating Gimel Tammuz, which has also to do with Gimel. And as well, even Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the final stage of the Geula. So Yud Gimel Tammuz this year is going to come out on a Tuesday. And Tuesday is also the Inyan of Kitayv. Yom Shlishi, the 3rd day. Rabbi always stresses that in the creation of Tuesday, the expression of Tayv, the Rebishter saw it is good, Vayara Lakim Ki Tayv, is mentioned twice. So Tuesday is a day of special significance that good is mentioned twice in the creation of Tuesday. Now we will go over to this week's parsha. Today's parsha is Parshas Korach. So the question arises, which is a very obvious question. We know that B'chlal B'Yidin we are always very careful if to whom we name something. How is it that a Sedra, which is read and it's a part of Torah, it's read in Shul, a Sedra was named after a person like Korach? Korach is not a person, is not a desirable person. We don't look up to him. On the contrary, Korach did wrong things. So here we say that the Sedra is named on Korach. Rabbi says you may want to answer it. Look at following weeks. We have a Sedra named Balak. And Balak maybe was even worse than Korach. And nonetheless, we have a Sedra named after him. Rabbi says this does not answer the question. On the contrary, this also gives us the question, how taka do we have a Sedra named Balak? But furthermore, Rabbi goes, when a Yid does something wrong, it is worse than when a Goy does something wrong. So when we try to compare between Korach and Balak, Korach was a Yid, however Balak wasn't. So when Korach did something wrong, it is naturally worse than the wrongdoing of Balak. So again, getting back to our Sedra, how is it that we have a question, how is it we have a Parsha that is named after Korach? He says, in order for us to understand the Inyan of Korach, let us look in to the way Korach is spelled, to the lettering of Korach. Korach is spelled Kuf, Reish, Ches. B'chlal we know that lettering is an Inyan which is very meaningful. The famous incident which Rebbe referred to briefly today, that when the Alter Rebbe was seeking for a Malamed for his son, the Mittler Rebbe, he called in an individual And he told him, famous story, he told him, let's exchange mitzvahs. I have a mitzvah, I have to educate my child. You have a mitzvah that you have to be mefarnes your family. So let's change. I will help you fulfill your mitzvah and you help me fulfill my mitzvah. In other words, he hired him to be a melamed for his son. And he made up with him that he should teach the Mittel Rebbe Aleph Beis. In course of conversation, the Alter Rebbe tells him, what is an Aleph? Alter Rebbe used to talk everything with a nign. The Alter Rebbe began saying, as a pintele von oben, und a pintele von unten, und a kav, a line of Yerushalayim in the middle, this is what composes an Aleph. In other words, the part from above and a part from below. And when these two are attached with a line of Yerushalayim, this is what an Aleph is. So we see that an emphasis is put on letters. I brought, for example, letter Yud. Letter Yud reflects always the concept of a pinta liyid. It's the letter Yud, and the Yid is also called a Yid.
Yud.
A Yid, which is same idea. And what does this stress? The pintalid and the kudah of every Yid, which every Yid possesses. Getting back to Korach, Chazal tell us, based on the pasuk, B'ko Hashem tzurei lomim, B'yudkei Hashem tzurei lomim. So Chazal say that with letter Yud, the Rebishter created Olam Haba, and with letter Hey, the Rebishter created Olam Hazeh. What is letter Hey? Letter Hey has two lines that are attached one with another, and the left line is a separate line which is not attached. This is the letter Hey. And as it's explained in Chassidus, what is the inyan of letter Hey? This left line brings out the advantage of Maisa. There are three lines: Machshava, Dibur, and Maisa. Machshava and Dibur come together. Maisa is already a world in itself. It's something separate. And that is why the Hey, the left foot, which reflects Maisa, is not attached in any way with the other two letters. What is Korach? Each letter in Korach is similar to the Hey, but a little off track with the Hey. The Kuf is the same idea as a Hey, but the left foot extends lower. What does it mean? It means that the Koyach of Maisa is not in the area where it should be, but it falls down below, it falls down into Klippa. Naturally, this is no good. Reish is a part of a Hey. That's what a Reish really is. I've also mentioned the Reish is different. The Reish has similarity to the Dalet. It doesn't have the extension the Dalet has. But primarily, the Reish does not have the left foot, which the Hey would have. What does this mean? It means again the same inyan, the lack of appreciating the inyan of Maisa. And what is the Ches? The Ches is how Machshava, Dibur, and Maisa are all attached. In other words, it does not show the separation of the left side. In other words, it does not show the separation of the Koyach of Maisa. In other words, it does not show the stress and the significance and the importance of Maisa. But in Aveda speaking, a mixture of all inyanim together, not separating between Machshava, Dibur, and Maisa, which each and every one of these in themselves are wrong. This is not the kavanah of B'riyas Olam. The kavanah of the Rebishter is B'kei Nivra Olam Hazeh, and not in any way neither a kuf, neither a reish, neither a ches. And here, talking on this inyan, the Rebbe began speaking how there are people that were given their mission in this world. And to many people, it is the fact that they were given a mission to be a malamed, to be a teacher, and to teach individuals Aleph Beis. Aleph Beis on a level of teaching Aleph Beis to children, who are just learning Aleph Beis, as well as teaching the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit to adults. So this person is saying, why should I be involved in such an inyan of teaching Aleph Beis? I have much greater things to do. I can accomplish inyanim which are by far greater. he will put on, he's busy occupied putting on 2 pairs of tefillin, he's busy occupied fasting, and he's making to himself a cheshbon that by decreasing his chela v'dam, his flesh and blood, it is compared to bring a kolb. And how is there anything greater than bringing a kolb? So why did we demand from him and tell him that his inyan is teaching Aleph Beis? Why is his inyan teaching Aleph Beis? He's involved in such high ruchnistik inyanim. He's accomplishing such tremendous spiritual accomplishments which are equivalent to being makra the kolb. So what do we say? Stop whatever you're doing and go ahead and make sure that a Yiddish kind is learning Aleph Beis. Rabbi brings in the Chazal. Chazal say that a Nazir who's holding himself back, who's refraining from drinking wine, is considered a sinner. Why? Shetziyar atzmai min hayayin. He was a mitzayer. He prohibited himself from something which the Torah said you're allowed to do, and he did not do it. He's considered a sinner. In other words, when the Torah tells us, the Torah gives us permission to do things, don't go ahead on your own and accept upon yourself not to do it. Same regarding Tanaisim. This is not what the Torah wants. So what is he saying? Making all types of calculations, how he can accomplish higher inyanim and greater inyanim, and then he will have a meeting and call together several people, and then at this meeting what will be decided? That another meeting has to be called. But as far as bringing it down into reality, to see to it that the Aleph Beis to a Jewish child is being taught, if this is not accomplished, then the main inyan is lacking. The Gemara tells us that when a Yid comes on the world to come, after giving back the neshama to its master, what does the Rebbe ask? Nasasa v'nasata be'emunah. Did we do our, simple meaning of it is, did you deal honestly? Did you carry through all your dealings on this world honestly? The Rebbe says, the Rebbe is teaching, neshama comes down into this world to learn Torah, to be mekayim mitzvahs. Nonetheless, when the neshama comes back, this is not the question what the neshama is asked. Did you learn Torah and be mekayim mitzvahs properly? This question is not asked. What is the question that's asked? Did you fulfill your mission? Your umnis. What's the taich umnis? Nasasa v'nasato be'emunah. Did you do whatever Nesida Reinu, whatever the mission that Nesida Reinu put upon you, did you fulfill that properly? And the stress is be'emunah. What's meant be'emunah? Chassidus always teaches what's the inyan of emunah. There's a person is given his seichel, his intellect, which without he can understand. Emunah is the taich, a level above the person's understanding. And enochanam, it may be above and beyond your understanding. But this is what Nesida Reinu has put upon us, and this is what we have to do. So we have to remember that when we come on in the world to come, what is the first question? Nasasa v'nasata be'emunah. Did you handle? In other words, again, what is meant here? It's not meant the gashmistic handling. It's meant your neshama shlichus on this world, the mission which you were sent down for. Did you fulfill it honestly or didn't you? So again, the Rebbe kept on stressing him in very, very, very strong words on the importance of Pashat, seeing to it. I spoke about it later in the Farbrengen as well, in continuation to what he's been talking about the last few weeks. Pashat, to see to it that every child gets a Jewish chinuch, and to see to it that every child and every Yid is taught the Aleph Beis, whether we're talking about Aleph Beis in the simple sense of Aleph Beis, mamish the Aleph Beis, which actually Aleph Beis means the beginning of Yiddishkeit, to make sure that everybody has and has achieved the basic fundamentals of Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe continued with explaining Rashi in this week's Sedre, and as the custom is lately that the Rebbe stresses the beginning of the Sedre, the Rebbe raised the question right at the beginning of the Sedre, Vayikach Korach, the pasuk says, and Rashi brings out Parsha zu Yofa Nidreshes b'Medrash Rabbi Tanchuma, that this Parsha is explained well in the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma. The Rebbe says this is a very unusual Rashi. This is probably the only time in Chumash we have such a Rashi. Rashi's inyan is usually to tell us Pshat. At times we know where Rashi sees that with the explanation of Pshat, the bio and the explanation in the pasuk is insufficient. That is when Rashi gets involved and also quotes a Medrash. Here Rashi does not tell us what the Medrash is. Right? And Rashi does not say any explanation al pi pshat. Why does he tell us? You should know that look up in Rabbi Tanchuma, and this entire parsha is Yofa Nidreshes. It's explained very well in Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma. It's very unusual. Not very unusual, more than that, this is the only place in Rashi, in the entire Chumash, where Rashi gives us an introduction, before he even says the Medrash, before he even tells us what the Drash is. It gives a comment like this, that this parsha is very well gedarshent in the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma. And as the Rebbe continued, that the Vayikach Korach, which is the next, again after this Rashi there's another Rashi, Vayikach Korach, and Rashi explains what does it mean, Lokach es atzmoi, Korach took himself. And then Rashi goes on with another pshat, that whom did he take? He took the 200 Sanhedrois. And as the Rebbe brought out, the first pshat which Rashi brings, this is the one which is like quoted from the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma, as well as several other commentaries of Rashi in this week's Sedre are based on the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma. The Rebbe also brought out al Pichsidis, as he calls it, the V'hacha Yitein El Liboy. What's the pshat? Vayikach Korach. Korach has taken. What does Rashi say? Lokach es atzmoi. He took himself. What's the pshat? Lokach es atzmoi. Person takes himself. The Rebbe brought out al Pichsidis. There's the etzem of a yid. See this, it's explained that the neshama of a person is composed from 5 parts. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, and chai yechida. And if we want to talk more, what is really the essence of the neshama, it's usually explained that the main part of the neshama, that is in chai, and yet more than that in yechida. And that is the etzem of the person. What do we mean when Rashi uses the expression lokach es atzmoi? That the Rebbe gives a yid koiches, that he should be able to overcome, to get above his yechida, above his etzem, and control and nemezich to take his etzem, which is something which is explained more at length in Chassidus. But this is briefly how the Rebbe referred to it. This is the same idea which Rashi stresses here. Lokach es atzmoi. A yid is bekoyach. A yid is given this koyach, kind of like to go above his own self, above his own level of his etzemdika level, of his level of chai and yechida, and be like keach esatzmai, and put himself over into another area and upgrade himself even from such a point of view. I've also spoken today's Rambam, as he usually does. Always mentions something in the meaning of Rambam. Today the Rebbe brought out an interesting explanation in the Inyanim of Karbonis. Every korban required a shchita, the slaughtering of the korban. And there's a halacha, shchita ksheira bizar, which means, this is in today's shiyah of the Rambam, there are avodas in the Beis Hamikdash that have to be done by a kohen, avodas in the korban. The shchita, the shechting of the korban, is something which is zar, meaning a stranger, a Yisrael can also do. The Rebbe says this is something which we have to understand. Why? Because if we look into the other halachas of the Rambam which we learned today, there the Rambam discusses how by having an improper thought, by being makre the korban, what I mean by improper, meaning that he doesn't have the intention of shechting it l'shem korban, or having a thought that he will eat, every korban had a fixed amount of time, how long it was allowed to be eaten. And if while shechting the korban, one intends that he will eat the korban after the permissible time, this passes the entire korban. From here we see how important and what kind of a major role the avodah of shchita is by a korban, to the extent that when one has the not proper intentions while shechting the korban, he could passel the entire korban. How does this correspond to the idea that saying that shchita ksheira b'zar, that even a zar, meaning one who is not a kohen, can also shecht the korban? If shchita is such an important part, such an important component of the korban, how can it be that shchita should be kosher by a zar? A zar meaning a stranger, not a kohen. The Rebbe brought in also But regarding Yom Kippur, the entire Avodah had to be done with the Kohen Gadol. So the question arises, Yom Kippur, when everything is required to be done by the Kohen Gadol, could a Zar, a stranger, shech the Karbanos of Yom Kippur? And this question is discussed in Svar. Even those that claim that a Zar cannot shecht on Yom Kippur, again, that's for a special reason. That's not because a Zar cannot shecht. That's for the special reason because the Avodah of Yom Kippur, everything which is done Yom Kippur, is done through Kohen. But it does not take away from the power which is given to this component in the code of Shechita, that Shechita any other time other than Yom Kippur could be done by a Zar. And even in Yom Kippur it also could have been done by a Zar. But why not? According to those that claim that it can't, it's because the entire Avodah Hayom has to be done through a Kohen. But other than that, Shechita is Ksheira b'Zar. So we have to understand it. So here the Rebbe gave us an explanation b'chlal in the Inyan of Shechita. Actually, we know by Yidden that there's a concept of Tsar Balachayim. We're not allowed to cause any irritation, any Tsar, to any animals. And we know, Alpi, going back, before Matan Torah, there were special halachas regarding Goyim, when they are allowed to eat, what type of meat they are allowed to eat, and so forth. So why is it takeh that the Torah permitted that we had to slaughter meat, shecht meat, and then we could eat it? So here there's a Gemara. Gemara explains the Inyan of Vishachat. Gemara in Chulm uses the expression Ein Vishachat Ela Umoshach. Gemara refers to a halachic aspect of it, that Shechita has to mean Umoshach, that the Sheichet who's slaughtering has to carry through, has to tzid durch the chalef, means the knife that he's slaughtering with. Chassidus, however, is teaching a deeper teich. What's the teich Umoshach? Umoshach is a teich to tzi. What's the teich to tzi? The accomplishment of Shechita is that it uplifts the behemoth which was geshacht. What does it mean? Simple. We know that there are various categories. There are categories of Doimim, Tzameach, Chai, and Medaber. The behemoth that's being slaughtered is in the category of Chai. What's happening through Shechita? Through Shechita, what's happening is it's becoming permissible to be eaten by people. And Memela, when people are going to be eating it, they are going to be mile, they're going to be uplifting the behemoth. The behemoth is no longer going to be part of Chai, it's going to become part of Medaber. So the behemoth through Shechita is really achieving that it's reaching a higher level. And especially when the Medaber, who is eating this meat, is utilizing the strength of the meat that he's eating, he's utilizing it in the proper direction. So this is the real birur, v'zichor, this is the real purification. Here the behemoth is really purified and uplifted. So this is the Rebbe explaining, this is the whole Inyan of Shechita. So that is why, even though Enochanam, Tzar Balachayim is something which is very much plays an important role in halacha. That's time we're not allowed to irritate a behemoth or an animal without any reason. Here it's not a tzar. Here it's through this shechita which we're slaughtering the behemoth. By this we're doing, I use the expression, kind of like a favor to the behemoth. Why? Because the behemoth is really being uplifted to a yatayah madrega. And this is the entire Inyan of shechita. It's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe also refers to Pirkei Avos. Today it is the fourth Perek, which begins with a quotation of Ben Zayma. Ben Zayma Imer Ezo Chacham Aleim in Mikol Adam. So the Rebbe discussed at length regarding Ben Zayma. We know we have Ben Zayma and we have Ben Azai. In fact, Ben Azai is the one whose quotation is brought in Mishnah 2. And these two Tanoim are not referred to by their own name. They're referred to as Ben Zoyma or Ben Azar. So the Rebbe says in Sfarim it's brought many inyanim regarding why. Some that claim that they did not receive smicha, they were not ordained, and that is why they were always referred to by their father's name. It's also brought in Sfarim that they passed away at an early age, and again a reason not to call them by their own name. The Rebbe brought something interesting which is brought in Sfarim, that regarding Ben Zayma, that Ben Zayma lived for 133 years. So we say he lived 133 years, that's more than an average 70, 80 year life, or even more than 120. So again, we cannot apply to this that they passed away at an early age. Or perhaps, the Rebbe says, there may be a possibility to say that this quotation of Ben Zayma was said before he received smicha. He taka lived much till 133 as they bring out. But this quotation he said before he received smicha, because Bechlal the Rebbe says it's brought in Sfarim that the goal of all Tanoim and Amaroyim was that they did want to receive smicha. They had this eagerness to receive smicha. So obviously Ben Zayma also did. But this quotation may be something which he said before. It's also brought to our attention that Alter Rebbe entered Pirkei Avos into the Siddur. So if we look through carefully, we will notice that there are changes in the Alter Rebbe's version of Pirkei Avos and to other versions of Pirkei Avos. Otherwise, the Alter Rebbe did not have to put it into the Siddur. He just could have told us that on the summer Shabbosim, we recite Pirkei Avos and we should take it out of the Sefer. The fact that the Alter Rebbe put it into the Siddur means that the Alter Rebbe looked through the text, approved the text of Pirkei Avos as it is in the Siddur, which is, this Siddur is based on the Alter Rebbe's. Rebbe brings to our attention that we will notice what is the saying of Ben Zayma. Ben Zayma, who's considered wise? The one who learns from every person. Shenema and a pasuk is quoted on this. Mikol melamdai hiskalti. From all those who have taught me, I have gained wisdom. Then the pasuk goes on, Ki eidesecha sichali. Your testimonies are my conversations. Rebbe says, if we look carefully, we will notice that in other texts of Pirkei Avos, they just bring the first half of the pasuk of Ki Mikol melamdai hiskalti. The other half of the pasuk, Ki eidesecha sichali, is not quoted. So again, we see the accuracy of the Alter Rebbe's text comparing to other texts, because the Alter Rebbe definitely had an intention why he did add these words of Ki eidesecha sichali, even though the main raya, the main evidence is from the first half of the pasuk of Mikol melamdai hiskalti. The Rebbe did explain something why Taked Alter Rebbe brings in Ki eidesecha sichali. Remember it exactly. I do remember that the Rebbe did add on, sicha means like a light conversation. That's called a sicha. Sicha is a conversation. Rebbe said that when we have sichos of Rabbeim, we have to treat them properly, that the sicha eidesecha sichali. In other words, to look up to every comment, every saying, every expression from Rabbeim, and to look up to it and appreciate it properly. But the Rebbe said more than this, why the Alter Rebbe does bring the eidesecha sichali, I don't recall offhand. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that being that we are before Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, we have to prepare ourselves properly for Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, but also referred to the inyan which he spoke before, which he spoke earlier in the Farbrengen, how the importance that everybody should know to fulfill his mission, the importance of, one saying, not underestimating the inyan of teaching Aleph Beis, and to make sure that this is done properly. So the Rebbe, at the end of the Farbrengen, referred to it again, and he referred to something which he mentioned last week. Last week he referred also to an expression of somebody coming to the Frierdiker Rebbe and asking for guidance in an inyan and wanted to be guided step by step.
In other words, be told exactly do this, and so forth, like a ben yochid, like a papyeshete ben yochid, like a ben yochid who's that's right, like a pampered ben yochid. Thank you. The Rebbe says this is not. Explained it last week at length, that this is not the proper approach. Approach is we are told what we have to do, and we know what we have to do, and this is what we have to do, and therefore doesn't want that discussing this should result that everyone will start thinking he will appoint emissaries and he will appoint messengers to do this for him and to do that for him, and then he will start getting all different types of letters and explanations. This is not the intention of his talk. The intention of the talking is that it should happen, and that people should respond to it. And again alerted us that being that we are before Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, to make sure to arrange for proper Chassidische Farbrengens on the days of Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz, the days before and the days after. And the days before, he specified the Mondays and Thursdays, which are special days, as well as the Beis Tammuz itself, and the Shabbos before, or even the Shabbos later. The Shabbos after Yud Beis Tammuz, that is the day of Shiva Asa b'Tammuz, 17 days in the month of Tammuz. And being that 17 days in the month of Tammuz this year comes out on a Shabbos, and Shabbos we do not observe Shiva Asa b'Tammuz, so there's an expression, Hoyil ve'itche, being that it was postponed from Shabbos to Sunday, may it be fulfilled that it should be postponed completely. In other words, we shouldn't have to celebrate, we shouldn't have to have Shivasa b'Tammuz any longer. It should be converted to a Yontif. And especially this year, that it's a special year of Hakel, and a year of Tismach, and a year of Tesamach. Tismach meaning happiness for our own self, as well as Tesamach bringing the message of happiness to others. So again, the Rebbe stressed very strongly, it's very appropriate to see to it, to arrange proper Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengens, should be arranged accordingly and properly as suitable as it suits for the celebration of Yud Beis Tammuz. Hagutavach.